Hello and welcome to the session on Gordon Allport, a trait theory of personality. Definition of personality and concept of trait. Gordon Willard Allport provides a precise definition of personality as follows. Personality is a dynamic organization within the individual of those psychophysical systems that determine his unique adjustments to his environment in 1937, that determine his characteristic behavior and thought in 1961. The term dynamic organization implies that not only is personality constantly developing and changing, but there is within the persons some kind of central organization. This holds the components of personality together and related them each other. The term psychophysical systems implies that person is not just a hypothetical construct formed by the observer, but a real phenomenon composed of mind and body elements fused into a personality unity. The term characteristic signifies the uniqueness of the single person. Concept of trait. It is said that no two people are completely alike. According to Allport, trait is the most valid unit of analysis for representing what people are like and how they differ from one another psychologically. He defines trait as a neuropsychic structure having the capacity to render many stimuli functionally equivalent and to initiate and guide equivalent, meaningfully consistent forms of adaptive and expressive behavior in 1961. Allport in 1966 published an article entitled Traits Revisited, in which he proposed 8 basic criteria to define a personality trait. A trait has more than nominal existence. Personality traits are not fictions, they are a very real and vital part of man's existence. Every person possesses certain generalized action tendencies, for example, aggressiveness, extraversion, honesty, introversion, etc. These are real and actually exist inside people. A trait is more generalized than a habit. Traits account for the more permanent, enduring and general features of our behavior. Habits, while enduring, refer to more specific tendencies and are less generalized in terms of situations which may arouse them or responses which they evoke. For example, a child may brush his teeth twice daily. This is a habit. With the passing of years, brushing one's teeth not only becomes habitual, but is woven into broader systems of habits, namely a trait of personal cleanliness. A trait is dynamic or at least determinative in behavior. Traits underline behavior, they cause behavior, they motivate the person to seek stimulus situations in which he can manifest his traits. For example, a college student with a strong sociability trait does not just sit around and wait to go to parties to be sociable. He actively seeks out parties so that he can express his sociability trait. A trait existence may be established empirically. Traits cannot be observed directly, but it is possible to verify their existence. To give an example, repeated actions of subjects, case histories or biographies or statistical techniques that determine the degree of coherence among separate responses, etc. A trait is only relatively independent of other traits. No trait is an island, they overlap. There is no rigid boundary separating one from another. Rather, the personality is comprised of a network of overlapping traits only relatively independent of one another. A trait is not synonymous with moral or social judgment. Personality is important, not character. Many traits like loyalty, greed, etc. are bound by social demands and socio-cultural factors. A trait may be viewed in light of either the personality that contains it or its distribution in the populations at large. For instance, the trait of shyness has both unique and universal aspects. It is unique for the person because it influences a person's life. As a trait can be studied universally by constructing a reliable and valid shyness scale and determine how people differ in it. Acts or even habits that are inconsistent with a trait are not proof of the non-existence of traits. Types of trait. Allport proposed that traits may be classified into a threefold and somewhat overlapping category system according to the degree to which they pervade and influence individual behavior. Cardinal traits. If a trait is extremely pervasive, so pervasive that almost all a person's activities can be traced to its influence, it is a cardinal trait. The meaning of a cardinal trait may be readily grasped by considering the many trait adjectives derived from historical and fictional characters. To give an example, when someone is being referred to as being a Gandhian, the cardinal disposition of being non-violent is being inferred. Central traits. Less pervasive but still quite generalized dispositions of the individual are what Allport termed central traits. They are the building blocks of personality. Specifically, central traits are those tendencies that a person often expresses which people around him can readily discern. To cite an example, a person being outgoing, sociable, etc. Secondary traits. These are dispositions which are less conspicuous, less generalized, less consistent and thus less relevant as compared to cardinal or central traits. Food preferences, specific attitudes and other situationally determined characteristics of the person would be classified under this group of traits. However, it must be remembered that to know the secondary traits of a person, the person must be known quite intimately in order to discern the secondary traits. Common traits versus individual traits. Allport also distinguished between common and individual traits. The former includes any generalized dispositions to which most people within a given culture can be reasonably compared. The logic for assuming the existence of common traits is that members of a given culture are subject to similar evolutionary and social influences, therefore, they develop somewhat roughly comparable modes of development. Those characteristics peculiar to the individual which do not permit comparisons among individuals are referred to as individual traits. They are also called personal dispositions or morphological traits, and these traits always operate in unique ways within each person. This category of traits most accurately pinpoints the personality structure of any given individual. The Proprium. Development of selfhood. One thing that motivated human being is a tendency to satisfy biological survival needs, which Allport termed as opportunistic functioning. Allport also felt that opportunistic functioning was relatively unimportant for understanding most of human behavior, because he was of the view that most behaviors of individual are motivated by something very different. This different aspect is the one that helps express one's unique self. This is termed as propriate functioning. Propriate comes from the word proprium, which is Allport's name for the essential concept, the self. He had reviewed hundreds of definitions for that concept and came to feel that in order to be more scientific, it would be necessary to dispense with the common word self and substitute something else. Allport considered proprium from two basic viewpoints, namely phenomenological and functional. Phenomenological means the self is considered in terms of what it experiences. Allport suggested that the self is composed of all the aspects of a person experiencing, that is, what the person sees as most essential or important and not incidental or accidental. It also means warm as against being cold in terms of emotions, and central, which means that the self is a central part and not peripheral of the self. Allport considered the self as having 7 functions as given below. A sense of bodily self. This is a sense of one's own body, including bodily sensations, at least to one's existence, and therefore remains a lifelong anchor for self-awareness. Allport notes that one's bodily sense is so basic that most adults are unaware of it. It assumes importance only when pain or illness strikes. A dramatic example of how the natural intimacy of bodily functions can readily become alien is seen in the following exercise. First, imagine yourself sucking blood from a cut in your finger, then picture yourself sucking blood from a band-aid around your finger. What was formerly perceived as belonging intimately to your body instantly becomes cold and disgusting. Presumably, most adults retain a very infantile conception of their bodies, otherwise examples of his sort would not be so unpalatable. The sense of self-identity. Here continuity of self despite the changes taken place. This is most evident when the child, through acquiring language, recognizes himself as a distinct and constant point of reference. Clothing, toys and other precious possessions also strengthen his self-identity. Sense of self-esteem. Essentially, self-esteem is an individual's evaluation of himself. Self-esteem is a feeling of pride that results when a person accomplishes things of one's own. This aspect of proprium emerges during the 3rd year of life. It depends on the child's success in mastering tasks and his urge to explore and manipulate the environment. The sense of self-extension. Self comes to include relevant aspects of the social and physical environment. This evolves during 4 to 6 years of age, when children realize that their physical body also belongs to certain aspects of their environment, including people. Children learn the meaning of mine. The self-image. How others view me is another aspect of selfhood that emerges during childhood. Now is a time when the child realizes that parents expect him to be good, while at times he is naughty. However, the child has neither clearly developed conscience nor any image of himself as he would like to be as an adult. The sense of self as a rational copper. Between 6 and 12 years of age, the child begins to realize fully that he has the rational capacity to find solutions to life's problems so that he can cope effectively with reality demands. Reflective and formal thought appear, and the child begins to think about thinking. But the child does not yet trust himself to be an independent moral agent. He dogmatically believes that his family, his religion and his peer group are right. Propriate striving. Allport believed that core problem for the adolescent is the selection of an occupation or other life goal. The adolescent knows that the future must follow a plan, and his selfhood assumes a dimension entirely lacking in childhood. Pursuing long-range goals, having a sense of directedness and intentionality in striving for defined objectives, imparting to life a sense of purpose. This is the essence of propriate striving. Examples of propriate striving include all forms of behavior that serve self-enhancement. The artist, the scientist, the parent all strive for goals that are strictly speaking unattainable, but which unify personality to make life meaningful. Functional autonomy. Basic to Allport's trait theory is the underlying idea that personality is dynamic, motivated growing system. In fact, Allport held that any theory of personality pivots upon its analysis of the nature of motivation. Allport proposed that an adequate theory of human motivation must meet 4 requirements. First, it must recognize the contemporaneity of motives. While knowledge about a person's past helps, that such historical facts are useless unless they can be shown to be dynamically active in the present. Second, it must be a pluralistic theory allowing for motives of many types. Third, such a theory must ascribe dynamic force to the individual's cognitive processes, especially to the individual's long-range intentions and plans. For Allport, the most significant questions one can ask a person in order to understand his personality is, what are you trying to do with your life? An adequate theory of motivation must therefore address itself to what sort of future a person is trying to bring about. And fourth, the theory must allow for the concrete uniqueness of motives. Allport insisted that the study of motivation must focus on how motives function in unique ways in the individual organism. The concept of functional autonomy of motives provides, in Allport's view, the necessary foundations for a theory of motivation which satisfy the 4 criteria specified above. This is undoubtedly the best known and most controversial of the concepts contained within Allport's theoretical system. In many ways, it constitutes the core of his trait theory. The principle of functional autonomy states that adult motives are not related to the earlier experiences in which they originally appeared. The past is past, no strings. A person's motives today are functionally autonomous, independent of whatever might have brought them into existence originally. The personality is therefore divorced from its past. Any bond to the past is purely historical, not functional. What you are today, you are today. You are not motivationally bound to your past history. Functional autonomy clearly means that a given form of behavior may become an end or goal in itself, despite the fact that it may have been originally adopted for some reason. For example, he pointed to the case of a young student who first undertakes a field study in college because it is required, because it pleases his parents, or because it comes at a convenient hour. As he starts working, he finds himself absorbed in the topic, perhaps for life. The original motives with which he started on the project is no more present. What was a means to an end becomes an end itself. Kinds of autonomy. Allport eventually distinguished between 2 levels or types of functional autonomy. The first is perseverative functional autonomy. It refers to the reverberatory or feedback mechanism in the nervous system which is governed by simple neurological principles. These mechanisms become neurobiologically self-maintaining over time and help to keep the organism on track. For example, eating and going to bed at the same time each day. The main feature is repetitious activity. The second, propriate functional autonomy, refers to the acquired interests, values, attitudes and intentions of the person. It is a master system of motivation that imparts consistency to the person striving for a congruent self-image and a higher level of maturity and growth. People may not be constantly rewarded to sustain their efforts. Thus, it represents the striving for values and goals and a sense of responsibility that people take for their lives. The mature personality. According to Allport, psychologically mature adult is characterized by 6 attributes, namely, has a widely extended sense of self, has a capacity for warm social interactions, demonstrates emotional security and self-acceptance, demonstrates realistic perception, skills and assignments, demonstrates self-insight and humor, has a unifying philosophy of life. Let me summarize what we have discussed so far. This chapter provides a detailed analysis of Allport's trait theory of personality. The concept of trait and 8 basic criteria to define traits are well discussed. Along with the different types of traits, cardinal, secondary, common, individual traits are also discussed. The characteristics of the mature personality are also analyzed. Now you can work out the questions given here. What are the characteristics of traits? What are the different types of traits? What are the various stages of development of Proprium? What are the characteristics of a mature personality? What are the different types of functional autonomy and highlight the differences? Now you can go through the reference books listed here for further understanding. Patterns and Growth in Personality in 1961 by G.W. Allport, New York, Holt, Reinhardt and Winston. Personality Theories, Basic Assumptions, Research and Application in 1992 by L.A. Hjelle and D.J. Zieglar, New York, McGraw. Personality Theories, A Comparative Analysis in 1989 by S.R. Maddy, Homewood, Dorsey Press. Hope that you have enjoyed the session. We will meet again with another topic. Thank you.